Thank you for listening to the Latina Libertarian, proud to partner with the Independence Inn in Stratford, New Hampshire, a Free Stater owned and operated inn and home of the Heartwood Restaurant. Use coupon code LATINA10 for 10% discount for stays up to 4 days, or LATINA40 for a 40% discount on stays of 5 or more days. Explore the libertarian homeland from the seacoast to the White Mountains. Go to Free State events and meet the porcupines who live and love New Hampshire. To use this exclusive offer for my listeners and followers, go to www.theindependenceinn.com or call 781-413-6014 and book your stay. Let them know the Latina Libertarian sent you. Remember, coupon code LATINA10 for 1 to 4 days or LATINA40 for 5 or more days. Come and see all that the Free State has to offer. Now back to the show. Hi, and welcome to the Latina Homesteader with your host, Olga Maria. Joining me today is Realtor Dominic DeMaria, who works for Porcupine Real Estate. Formerly, he lived in New York, and he decided to move to New Hampshire during the pandemic in 2020. He stumbled upon the Free State Project, whose values resonated with him and his wife. And upon visiting, they decided to make the move. After several years in food service, Dominic made the leap to becoming a realtor so that he can have the flexibility to continue his activism and involvement with the community. One of his specialties is helping people who are moving to New Hampshire find land and property for homesteading. Thank you, Dominic, for joining me today.
Hi. Well, thank you for having me, Olga.
And, just as a little aside, Dominic is actually my realtor. So when my husband and I are ready to make that move, he's always sending me great properties and stuff like that. But I wanted to have you on my homesteading channel because I got to meet you in person after we've spoken on the phone several times and, kind of gone back and forth in terms of, relocating to New Hampshire. And we finally met in person at the homesteading conference for Homesteaders of New England, their fall gathering. And you gave a talk on real estate and what's happening in New Hampshire, but in particular for people who are interested in homesteading. So I wanted to have you on so you can share with us your experience and your thoughts and what that looks like for New Hampshire.
Sure. Yeah, there's a ton of topics to cover, but really what I would like to focus on is just like what people look for when they're buying land. A lot of people think that they want to buy land versus a home because they can build it exactly like they have it in their head. But they don't appreciate how much it actually costs to do that. First off, the time. It's not a quick process. The big thing is start to finish between the home search and everything else. It could take several years to get something from absolutely nothing like a piece of land into a house that you can move into. So that's the first thing. Like whenever I talk to somebody who's interested in buying some land and starting a homestead from scratch, it's, well, what is your timeline? Does it look like, do you want to do it as soon as possible? Because that might not be realistic. Then the other thing is, what are your intentions? Do you want to have a small hobby farm, or do you want a full scale production where you have an orchard and all sorts of animals and everything else? Those can definitely change what you're looking for and your price range drastically. So for you, let's take you for an example. When you're planning to move here to New Hampshire, what would you be looking for? We can kind of use you as an example, walk through the process.
So if I'm going to go with our ideal situation, it would be something similar to what we found in Vermont, but which is, again, experience gives you so much, but a workable home, because it would help to have already infrastructure on it. And I know people think homesteading, you should be completely off grid and all of that stuff. That can be something that you transition into, I think, because you can transition into going more and more off grid over time. It's really hard to do that from the offset.
Mhm.
I think it's a lot more expensive to do it that way. So sometimes even we'll look at different properties that you send us that maybe it's not a home that's like huge or anything, but I'm always like, okay, there's a structure there. It has a well, it's connected to power, so we can work with that. But ideally, I look for a few acres um and being in a town where there's not a whole heck of a lot of zoning.
Right.
So I'm not awfully picky, and I think that might be I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, like, because we're flexible in our vision, because we have this experience and we understand that we could probably make it work. It doesn't have to be exactly what we found here. It could be something a little bit different, but some type of a home on it with some space to expand with within a town that doesn't have a whole heck of a lot of zoning that's going to limit us if we wanted to have, let's say, a hoop house, if we're going to put up a barn, or if it has some type of a structure that we can use as a barn. So what we're doing right now is we have, very small scale, we have chickens for
Mhm.
eggs, and I raise poultry for meat.
Mhm.
So something that has some type of a space for that. Now, because I have that experience, I know that I don't need, 50 acres to do that. I'd love 50 acres, but, just a few acres, I'm able to do that on a small scale. So that's kind of what we're looking for.
Yeah, and I find a lot of times people get a specific number of acres in their head. So it's like, I gotta have 10 acres, I gotta have 10 acres or 5 acres or whatever that number might be. And then they ask me to set up their search parameters based around those. Whereas, the difference between 8 and 10 acres isn't much, but it could knock out, a bunch of different results when you're doing your search. For me personally, when I lived in New York, I lived in Western New York, right outside of Rochester, and I had 11 acres, and I only used maybe 3 of them. The rest was
Right.
woods, and you know, it, the amount of time that was put into, because I was still in food service at that point, um, the amount of time that was put into actually, working the land and growing my garden. I had like 100 by 100 foot garden that we grew all sorts of stuff. I had chickens and all that fun stuff. But that was all of my free time versus my job. And it didn't leave much time for anything else, which is okay. I was happy at that point. But I look at it now and say, I probably could have got away with a 3 acre parcel or something like that with a better house and all that for the same price. So it really just comes down to whatever you're looking for. As far as the zoning goes, New Hampshire is very unique in that we have, I want to say it's 11 towns who have no zoning whatsoever, which there's a list on our website that has that information. So when people say, like, I want to be able to do whatever I want to do on my land, I always say, well, we should probably start with these towns. We'll start to look at those places. But I do remind people that that is a blessing and a curse, because just because you can do whatever you want with your land means that the guy next to you can do the same thing. So you run into a lot of situations where there's basically a junkyard on somebody's property directly next to yours or something like that. So it can be good and it can also be bad. So,
So it
um,
depends.
oh yeah, yeah. It all comes down to knowing your neighbors and really doing your research prior to moving in. And that is in today's market, you don't really get a whole lot of time to do that research, which is hard, for a lot of people, because the way the market's moving still, you have to make a decision pretty quickly,
Yeah.
and that is intimidating to a lot of people. So, especially with land purchases, it's always a good idea to do a lot of research and vet the towns, kind of have an idea of where you want to be, or at least where you don't want to be. That might be more useful. So, like you said, you want to make sure that your neighbors aren't going to, call you out on different zoning things or things like that. I would stay away from the bigger towns, like stay away from Manchester, stay away from Nashua, stay away
No
from.
problem there. Don't wanna be anywhere near there.
Yeah,
No
like those
offense to
areas.
those who live in those areas, but it's just yeah, like and that's important too. I would say, we were just in New Hampshire on Saturday. We were in the Concord area, kind of,
Oh, yeah.
we were running some errands. And that's the benefit of living in Vermont, is that we go to New Hampshire quite frequently. And I, was in that Manchester area for the conference. Actually, I've never been. So it was like, wow, okay, this is a city. Like, this
Yeah.
is definitely, it's nice, but it's just not for me, but it was nice that we got to visit. But surprisingly, I wasn't expecting New Hampshire to be as rural as it was, going all the way far south. Like, literally that immediate area of Manchester, like, you feel, oh, this is more rural, little kind of suburby, and then you get right into it. And then just a few minutes outside of it, it's pretty rural again. Like, I was
Yeah.
surprised how rural it was going all the way so far south. So
There's
there's a
even
lot of potential, no matter where you want to, area you want to move to in New Hampshire, for example, in terms of, being able to homestead even on a small scale
yeah, and that's another
or
one of the
larger scale.
yeah, it's another one of the criteria that I tell people to kind of keep in mind when they're trying to determine where they want to end up is distance to amenities. So like, where's your closest hospital? Where's your closest shopping center? Is there a specific, I know this sounds funny, but is there a specific restaurant that you really like to
Yeah.
be at? You know, for some people, a 30-minute drive is a day trip. My mother doesn't drive anywhere unless it's absolutely necessary. And I used to commute an hour back and forth to work every day. And she was like, why are you doing that? Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. But, you do what you got to do. To me, for driving, it doesn't make any difference. My record for longest trip was up in Pittsburgh, from where I live in the seacoast, which
That's
is 3.5 hours each way.
yeah,
So,
because that's right basically on Canada,
yep,
and New
right on the
Hampshire goes a
border.
little bit further north than Vermont does. Like, we kind of go here, and then New Hampshire goes up a little bit. So that's really far up.
Yeah, that was a day trip. So that was 7 hours on the road for that showing, and appointments that I had up there. But
Wow.
when you find the right house, you find the right house, and you kind of want to make sure that the person's vetted and make sure that everybody's on the same page with it before
Right.
you make a 7-hour trip. But you do what you have to do for the clients and make sure that everybody is happy with everything. Um, so yeah, close proximity to amenities is always very big. Yeah,
Do you find that there are more people who are looking to homestead in New Hampshire?
I think it's an equal mix. I tend to, because of the Free State Project and our connections with them, I often get a lot of people who are like, I want to live in the middle of the woods and I don't want to do anything with anybody else. Just leave me alone. Let me do my thing. Um, so I get a lot of those, but I also get a lot of families and things like that. The problem is a lot of people who think they want to live in the woods still want to be connected. And I think you brought up a little earlier that being off grid or anything like that, that means different things to different people.
Right.
So I have some friends who live in Croydon who are considered off grid. They have no cables coming from the public to their house. That's what they consider off grid. So they're producing their own energy. They have Starlink, so they're still connected to the internet, but there's no
Right.
actual cables coming to their house. They have a
Right.
well, they have, a lot of the things that they need are produced directly on their property, which is great. It's not living by candlelight. It's not, picking up
They're not
buckets of
Amish.
water.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, as long as people have a realistic idea of what they're looking for, we can work with pretty much anything. Um, Homesteading, one of the I always say, like, one of the things I ask a lot of questions when I meet with people is, like, how much time do you really want to put into the homesteading aspect of it? Are you going to maintain your job? Are you going to are you going to be able to work 6 hours a day on the farm that you're doing? Or is it going to be like, okay, I finished my 8-hour work shift or 10-hour work shift, depending on your work, and I'm going to put in half hour here, half hour there, or something like that, while I'm picking up the kids from school and everything else. You know, if you're just looking to do like hobby farm and small scale production, then you can pretty much live anywhere in New Hampshire and be a quote unquote homesteader.
Mhm.
Um, it really just depends on how deep you want to go into it. So,
Yeah, I mean, and that's true because homesteading is an umbrella term.
mhm.
So for some people it means, oh, you're producing every single, you're producing everything and you're making your own clothes. And for other people it's no, I am self-sufficient in some areas. I'm trying to be more independent, when it comes to some things. For some people I'm trying to be completely food sovereign and build a community or work within a community of people who are producing so that we're supporting one another. For some people it's, I'm homeschooling my kids and I'm trying to focus on my home in terms of what we're able to produce here. So it means different things for different people. And I think it's important when it comes to real estate because obviously more people are moving. This is an idea. It is a lifestyle that people are moving into. I mean, it's a growing movement. There's going to be a conference here in Vermont. I just found out in not this weekend, but the weekend after, where Joel Salatin is coming, and they're going to kind of be talking about, food sovereignty and this growing. So this is definitely something that you know people are looking to do, but it looks different for everyone, and I think that's a good thing. It's important that there's flexibility. It's not, you don't have to be Little House on the Prairie. You don't even have to have, like cows. You could just be homesteading where you're just, maybe doing some rabbits, or you're doing, like a couple of chickens or something. But um it's important though in real estate because you need flexibility. There needs to be some flexibility. The other thing too with homesteading is that you don't need a ton of space. You
True.
can literally, depending on, again, this is where it comes down to the town, but you can kind of be in town and you can have, an eighth of an acre and you could actually do a lot of stuff on your land. You can be really smart and you can grow a lot of your own produce. Have, an area where you have a few chickens. It just depends on like what your goals are. And I think that's the important piece when it comes to having a sense of what you want to do. And when you're looking to buy property, like, maybe this is your starting point, but what do you want to grow into? So I think
That's
it's
true.
great because these are the types of questions that you ask.
Yeah, and another thing that I talk about with potential clients or potential buyers is um, that the when you're selecting that parcel or that piece of land or that property that has a house on it already, you can't move it. Like if you're not sure this is where you want to be, and you buy that house and you stay there for a year or two, and then you decide you want something bigger, always kind of keep in mind that you're not going to be able to uproot all the trees that you've planted or
Right.
all of that kind of stuff.
Any
So like,
infrastructure. Yep.
you really want to plan out a lot of that stuff before you just dive into it. Um, so yeah, really having a clear picture of where you want to be in 5 years is usually the best way to start. So
Do you see, I mean, New Hampshire is unique in our region because of the Free State Project. So I think New Hampshire is just attracting different types of people, let's say, versus like Vermont or Maine or Massachusetts or Connecticut. You see people who are, moving to New Hampshire, like, free state minded people who want to be more independent in that sense, or who are looking to go to specific communities where there's more people who are doing this?
yeah, yeah, I would say a good portion of the people who I talk to want to do something along those lines, whether or not it's full blown. I want to buy a farm and do that
Yeah.
kind of thing, or just if I go here, am I going to have access to farm markets and other options like that in my area? That definitely comes up quite a bit. So.
And what are the demands for even people who like aren't, because I mean, homesteading is like 1%. But is there, what are the demands there for people who want these types of products? Because I think that's an important piece if you are looking to move there and be a producer. So what's the demand look like in New Hampshire for like farmers for like, farm raised products and cheeses and goat's milk and stuff like that, eggs and
Yeah, actually, the demand is pretty high. When we were first looking around for places to move away from New York, we really liked Vermont. The food culture in Vermont, I think, is fantastic. There's tons of breweries and
right.
dairies and all sorts of great food culture in Vermont. New Hampshire is getting there. Um, I think it's coming a long way. But we actually selected New Hampshire for a Free State project. Um,
Yeah.
and we're like, well, we can deal with what's going on here. My wife is actually a cheesemaker by trade for Bell and Goose cheese. It's based out of southern New Hampshire. And there are very, very few cheesemakers in New Hampshire. So when we settled, it was kind of, we picked Seacoast because it was close to where she was going to be working. And I wouldn't look any other way at this point. Like I would like to be up north probably at some point, but that'll be years down the road. Um, but yeah, the food scene and the production and like small scale farms and even large scale farms, there's a good portion of them in New Hampshire. Um, and they're all over, like you were saying earlier. The farm that she works on, they don't produce their own milk, but they get it from areas all over the state. But mostly it's sourced from New Hampshire. And the farm that they're based off of is right on the border with Massachusetts. So that's Seacoast region, and that's a fairly large farm that they're based off of. So you wouldn't necessarily think Seacoast farms and that kind of thing, but they are pretty much everywhere. So
Yeah, that's the interesting thing is it's important to get to know an area, to do some research, because you'd be surprised what you may find. That was my assumption too, and I was just like, I don't know why I was thinking that. I was just thinking because it's the proximity to Massachusetts, but Massachusetts has farms too. Massachusetts has rural areas. Like, it's just kind of like my mindset.
sure.
Um, and it is interesting. One of the um things, if we're just going to compare Vermont, for example, yeah, Vermont has a lot of farms. It has a lot less than what it used to have. And in fact, it's gets less and less because of all the regulations here. What are some of the regulations or changes that are happening in New Hampshire that are making it more attractive to people who want to homestead or farm?
I can't speak necessarily to what specific things are going on. I don't follow a lot of that as closely as I probably should, to be completely honest.
Mhm.
I know Stephen Nass, who you've
Yeah.
had on prior or who you've talked with before, is actively working on a lot of those things to help producers within New Hampshire. But there is a liberty minded community based out of even outside of the Free State Project who work to make a lot of those things easier on people who produce within the state. So,
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed that and I don't know if it's just because, like, I just drive along, like, through Frank. I live all the way up in northern Vermont. So when I
mm,
come over to New Hampshire, I'm going over Littleton and then I'm taking that 93 all the way down. So I'm just going through like a particular corridor. And like this past time that we came down past weekend, like I just being more just being more observing, I was like, wow, there's a lot more kind of open rural areas than like even from what I remember. So it seems like there's more production, food production that's taking place. I think Vermont has a lot more or has a history of having more, but that could just be because I don't know the history of New Hampshire in terms of like how much like farming's been done in the past versus how much more has been developed. Geography is somewhat similar in Vermont, New Hampshire, but I
yeah, it's
know that there are Vermonters that are making the move over the Connecticut River, like for this Free State project, but who do have that tradition of like farming and homesteading and are looking to do that. So I think that, I know that New Hampshire is moving in a better direction when it comes to making it as friendly as possible for freedom-minded people, but for people who want the freedom to be productive on their property with
and I do
homesteading.
think too it's so a lot of people are like, well, what have they really accomplished, the Free State Project? And I wouldn't be the one to ask that because there's a list that's like 5 miles long of all the things that these people who are working every day towards these things are working on.
Yeah.
What I will say is that even knowing that the group is out there and they're working to protect what we have right now and make sure that it doesn't go in the opposite direction and get more government involvement and regulations and all of that, just knowing that there is a wall that they're setting up, like a line of defense to make sure that nothing else is changing for the worse, is enough for me. I look at, a lot of people say, well, Maine is beautiful. There's tons of land and I can get it for half the price. Well, yeah, that's true. But do you know where Maine's going to be in 5 years? I don't know. Like, I know that there's going to be people here protecting what we have. So, to me, it seems like a more sound investment to look towards New Hampshire going forward than other areas around here. So,
Well, I was just having another conversation and we were just talking about the war on farming. I mean, there is a concerted effort to keep people dependent on corporate food systems that can absolutely control what you're eating, how much access to you have to something, right? Like recently, what was it? I don't think it was the UN. I think it was like the WHO that was like they want to get, Americans to eat like a lot less beef. And so it's just, you see these things and for people who are, kind of with the homestead mindset tend to be people who wanna be independent, who are just different, and not necessarily that you're politically libertarian, but you have a mind, you may not identify that way, but you just have a where you wanna have the freedom to do your own thing. And, if you already have that mindset, um, and you start doing things, you realize the limitations. Like, let's say you're raising chickens, you're like, gee, I'd like to, sell the chickens that I raise. And it's just like you realize right away, like, oh, you can't do it at a farmer's market because you were supposed to have done it in this type of a
right.
facility, or you have to have things registered, or you have to do, you start to kind of realize. And then we're either forced to move around that and create kind of our parallel system where we're working with people directly, or start advocating, like at the town level or at the state level for to be changed so that we're able to do that. So it's just things that are important when you're thinking about if you're in a position where you can move like where you want to do this, certainly reach out to Dominic
Yeah, absolutely. I
and
would
check
love to
out the
talk.
Free State Project.
I have a lot of conversations with people who, and there is no silly questions. I get a ton of questions, tons and tons and tons, and I will be completely honest. Most people have the conversation and then just go right back to doing whatever they were doing. Not everybody who inquires about things moves forward with their plans to move here, or they're like, well, we'll be 5 years out or 3 years out or whatever it is. So for me, it's the long game. As
Sure.
long as I'm helping people move, I think it's a great thing. So no question too small. So
And I know that in our region and, in Northern New England, there's been a resurgence of homesteading. I mean, this is why the Homesteaders of New England was even established. There's just this growing move, regardless of like, in particular, I see it like, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, but I'm sure certainly like I know people in Massachusetts and like, who are doing this on a small scale. There's just an increase of people who've become aware that they want to be more independent from mainstream food system and leaving the cities and looking for areas to do this that's feasible for them is definitely happening. um and yeah, for some people, it's going to take a little bit longer, but I'm just excited that it's even taking place. Obviously, I love what's happening in New Hampshire because I'm a libertarian, and I think, a libertarian homeland is a wonderful thing. And I'm just so glad you guys are so close to me. Um, so I always want to, like connect with folks, and I wanted to have you on because I know like you get this a lot and you're working a lot with people. So Dominic has his ears to the ground for people who are interested, who want to move to New Hampshire, that have that mindset, that are interested in homesteading, whether it's on a small scale or a larger scale. Where can people find you and connect with you to do that?
so you can go to our website. It's porcupinerealestate.com. You can also find me on Facebook. I have a page. I don't really use it all that much. I'm really bad at social media. I'll be completely honest. That's my project for next year is to get more involved. And yeah, to reach out directly to me. You can actually get my cell phone. We can put it in the notes for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, again, there is no small question. So whatever you feel like talking about, I will be glad to have a conversation with you. Even if you just want to ask, like, is it really happening in New Hampshire? Like, yeah, we can talk about that too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Dominic is really, really intelligent. And if you need a realtor for New Hampshire, please reach out to him because he's wonderful and very diligent. And for people who are interested, like, on my channel, this is a homesteading channel, and you're interested in moving to New England, like, definitely visit New Hampshire. I'm actually going to put a link up for something for people, like if you need a place to stay, you're going to see that link up probably right now.
What-
Thanks again. Please like and subscribe at Latina Homesteader. And thank you again, Dominic. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Olga.